Hello, Felix from Nintendo Life here, and today we're here to review Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series. This review was originally written by Mitch Vogel and converted into video by me. So, around the 5th console generation, we saw probably the greatest shift the game design industry has ever seen. Developers all over the world wrestled with how to transition from the 2D realm into the 3D one. And there was a lot of experimentation during this age, with platformers like Super Mario 64 and Spyro diving headfirst into this new dimension. But there were others like Crash Bandicoot that still kept a lot of the 2D design at the forefront. Launching in 1997 on the PlayStation 1, Klonoa Dawn of the Phantom Realm fell more in this latter camp, and though it seemed that Namco had largely abandoned the lovable Dream Traveler, he's been giving another shot with the Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series. This remake of the first game and its sequel, Lunasia's Veil for the PlayStation 2, is little more than a fresh coat of HD paint, but the two classics here still hold up as excellent platformers that no fan of the genre would ever want to miss. The story of this remake places you in the role of the cat-rabbit Klonoa, a dream traveler whose role is to venture into worlds within people's dreams and help bring balance and peace. Along the way on your journey, you're also aided by residents in these dream worlds and face a handful of silly antagonists who wish to fill these worlds with nightmares. It's all relatively lighthearted, but there are some seriously gut-punch moments that take things in amusingly dark and heavy directions. If you compare this to a typical 2D platformer, both of these games feature a little more narrative than is typically seen. But we really appreciated the pacing here, and it felt that it added notably to the overall experience. Despite the expansive and interwoven worlds featured, both Klonoa games are in fact simple 2D platformers at heart. The big gimmick here is the linear path you follow, which bends and curves through the environments, giving the illusion that it feels like a 3D platformer. Enemies can't be stomped on like in Super Mario, instead you have to shoot them with your wind bullets, which inflates them and lets you carry them above your head. You can then use these to either toss them as projectiles or use them mid-air for a double jump. Interestingly, the level designs are built around this wind bullet concept with more of a focus on puzzles rather than a raw test of dexterity. Klonoa is more figuring out how to use the available enemies to reach collectibles and out-of-reach places than it is to overcoming a tough obstacle course. In this way, it feels like both of these remakes have a sort of two-tiered design. You could compare this to a lot of Nintendo's 2D platformers. On one tier, you can simply focus on clearing each stage without worrying about extras, and this is extremely easy to achieve. But on the other tier, you can focus on scooping up all the collectibles along the way, and this is where substantial challenges comes in. In both games, there are 6 collectible items squirreled away in various places just off the beaten path. And there are also 150 dreamstones, basically coins, to pick up. Even in the earlier levels, it can be surprisingly difficult to snap up everything, but the rewards are well worth it as you unlock additional levels if you 100% enough stages. One thing you won't find much of in either of these games are the sense of mechanical variety. There are only a small handful of enemies you can come across, and level gimmicks to distinguish worlds from one another are rarely more than adding surface level variety. The wind bullet ability has to do a lot of the heavy lifting as it's virtually the only major gameplay mechanic here. Distinct enemy types such as an explosive foe or one with a particular color who has to be used to destroy color-coded barriers help to introduce some complexity to this mechanic, but there is this lingering sense that Klonoa could use a lot more power-ups and abilities to spice up these levels. This is perhaps the largest complaint one could have with either of these games. They're both a bit vanilla in terms of how they approach platforming. That's not to say that this game isn't worth experiencing, however, as the rather perfectionistic approach to puzzle platforming here is something that even today feels entirely unique. As for this collection itself, it meets the bare minimum standard for remaster. Aside from the spruced up presentation, there's also a fast forward feature for most of the cutscenes and the inclusion of an easier difficulty mode. Compared to other retro collectives, it feels like this entry is a little behind the curve, especially given that the concept art gallery and soundtrack player is locked behind a $20 DLC at the time of this recording. The two games here are great in their own right and do justify the price in admission. But it is disappointing that little else was done to celebrate and polish up the first new Klonoa release in years. In terms of the visuals, this manages to impress, as it presents these sprawling abstract dream worlds at their absolute best. Whether you're walking through a lush jungle or flying through the air at a circus, there are plenty of memorable set pieces and diversity in the environments to make levels feel distinctive. Though there is some sort of flat look to many of these textures, we rather appreciated the simple and extremely colorful approach of the old art. The only real downside to this Switch version is that it doesn't always have the best performance. Though 60 FPS is the target and sits around there most of the time, we experienced at several occasions where it seemed like there was a double-digit drop in frames per second. None of these stutters affected our progress or caused gameplay problems beyond being unsightly, but it is rather disappointing when remasters of games that were originally released on the PlayStation 1 and 2 have anything less than a near-perfect performance. Make no mistake here, Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series is the best way to currently play these two platforming classics, and Namco has done a decent job in presenting these games in the best possible light. With around 25 hours of dreamy, retro-styled platforming contained in this package, Klonoa veterans and younger platforming fans will find lots of love in the puzzle platforming level design and whimsical worlds on offer here. If you take the small performance issues aside, it's tough not to fall in love with this duology. Catch it when you can. We here at Nintendo Live give Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series on the Nintendo Switch an 8 out of 10. And now with the review done, it's time for Felix's personal thoughts. Now, I hadn't tried any of the Klonoa games before. I didn't have a PlayStation 1 or 2, and even though the first game was released on Wii, I was young at the time. I only played Mario. I probably didn't know about this game. But seeing that these are now on Switch, it was a perfect time for me to try these out. And I must say, these games are really good. I myself are a big fan of platformers, and these games have a unique take on this. There was some animations that were a bit, a bit lifeless. They just felt a bit out of place, especially when you go back and look at the original games, which had amazing cutscenes and stuff. Then this, well, it looks like it could use a bit more polish, but if you haven't tried these games for one reason or another, I definitely think that this is the time to try it out. Well, take care, play some Klonoa. Felix from Nintendo Live, out.